Hi everyone, and welcome back to another video where I'll be highlighting an underrepresented person in STEM. As it's February, it means that this is Black History Month in the US, and so I've decided that I'll dedicate this video to an African American who has left a lasting legacy in science and medicine. And so today I'll be highlighting the one and only Henrietta Lacks. Now, Henrietta herself wasn't a scientist, but she did make considerable contributions to the field of STEM. And while this sounds lovely, I'm also going to be highlighting the scandal that surrounded this and how she and her family have been mistreated. Henrietta was born in 1920 in Virginia and later moved to Baltimore. Her family were tobacco farmers and she followed in those footsteps as well. She had 5 children with her husband, the first one being born when she was only 14 and the last one being born when she was 30. A few months after the birth of her last born, Henrietta started to experience a weird feeling in her womb which she described as a knot. So she needed to go to the hospital. At that time, racial segregation was still a thing, and so the only hospital that would allow her as a black person to be treated was Johns Hopkins Hospital. At the hospital, Henrietta underwent a number of tests, and the doctors took a biopsy, so a sample of a mass that had been found in her cervix, and they diagnosed her with cervical cancer once they received the results back. Now, after her diagnosis, Henrietta was treated for this cancer with the use of radium, which is a radioactive metal. Radium can definitely kill cancer cells, but it can actually kill healthy cells as well, and it can cause mutations that can lead to cancers. It was the only treatment they really had available for invasive cervical cancer. And so Henrietta underwent surgery where the surgeon put radium tubes into her cervix, sewed it up, and then put additional radium plaques into the outer surfaces of her cervix. Now, this is where the first scandal happened. Before her surgery, while she was still under anesthetic, the surgeon cut cancerous and healthy tissue samples from her cervix without her knowledge or consent. These samples were then given to another doctor who was also a cancer researcher called George Guy, so that he could perform research. In his lab, George grew Henrietta's cancerous cells and her healthy cells, and he observed that her cancerous cells, they grew incredibly fast, 20 times faster than Henrietta's healthy cells. In addition to this, these were the first cells observed to divide multiple times and not die, and so these were known as immortal cells. George decided to name these immortal cells after Henrietta Lacks, and so took the first 2 letters from her first name and her last name and therefore called them HeLa cells. After these observations were made, George sent these cells to his colleagues and pretty much anyone who was interested in working on cancer research, again without Henrietta's knowledge or permission. These researchers exposed these HeLa cells to different drugs, toxins, radiation as a way to find out what exactly would kill these cancerous cells without damaging healthy cells. Meanwhile, Henrietta had recovered from surgery. She went back to the hospital for a checkup and they found that the tumour had reduced in size, which was good news. She then went on to have X-ray treatments and then had a second radium treatment just to make sure that all the cancer was gone. It seemed like her cancer had gone, so nearing the end of her treatment, she wanted to know when she would be fully recovered so that she could have children. The treatment that she had undergone had left her infertile. This wasn't explained to her before she underwent the treatment. In her medical records, it shows that she was only told that she would be infertile from this treatment after she had had the treatment. It said that if she had known beforehand, she wouldn't have actually undergone the treatment. So this was another instance of her mistreatment. She couldn't have been able to give her informed consent for this treatment because she actually didn't know all the risks associated with it. Now, sometime after her treatments, she started to experience discomfort again and so went to the doctors, and they found that her cancer had not only returned but it had spread. Tumours were found attached to her pelvic wall, which nearly blocked her urethra, and a few weeks later, tumours had been found on her kidneys, her lymph nodes, her bladder and her lungs. She was rapidly declining in health, and by the 4th of October 1951, she died. She was only 31 years old. After Henrietta's death, the hospital persuaded her husband to give them permission to do an autopsy. Now here comes another instance of breach of trust. During her autopsy, they took samples from her cervix, again without her or her husband's permission or knowledge, in order to use for research. After her death, Henrietta's cells, HeLa cells, were actually really crucial in the significant advances that were made in the biomedical field. For example, HeLa cells were used to develop the polio vaccine and mass-produced so that the polio vaccine could be tested. This helped save millions of American lives. In addition to this, the use of HeLa cells helped lead to significant biomedical advances such as cloning, gene mapping, in vitro fertilization, and research into cancer. And while these cells have been instrumental to the significant advances that have been made in the biomedical field, it's really important that we understand the problems or the issues associated with it as well, because these cells were acquired without Henrietta's or her family's knowledge or permission. They were mass-produced, they were bought and sold, and different companies or people have profited from buying and selling of her cells. And it was only 20 or so years after Henrietta's cells had been taken and used extensively within the science community that her family found out what had happened. In the 1970s, it was found that other cell types that had been growing in the lab with these HeLa cells had actually been contaminated with these cells. This was a problem that affected years' worth of published scientific data. So to combat this, scientists decided that they needed to know certain genetic markers within the HeLa cells that could differentiate it from other cells, and so they would know if other cells had been contaminated with these HeLa cells. But in order to do this, they would need the DNA from a family member of Henrietta. Now, a bit prior to this, Henrietta's name had been revealed in a tribute that had been published in a scientific journal for George Guy, who was the physician and cancer researcher who first worked on her cells. As her name was now public, it was possible for scientists to eventually determine who her husband was and get his contact details. So they called the family and asked them for blood samples. However, they didn't tell them that the blood samples were to use for research. They told them that it was to test for cancer. So again lies another issue where the family were misled, and so they couldn't give their informed consent. Now, to make matters worse, the scientists who took these blood samples, they actually published a paper, public access, where they revealed genetic markers from the DNA of the husband and 2 of the kids. This again was done without informed consent. And as I said before, it wasn't until the 1970s, so 20 years after Henrietta's death, that her family knew the extent to which her cells had been used. While the family didn't sue, it did raise some really important questions about informed consent and privacy. For example, in 2013, the genome of a strain of HeLa cells had been sequenced, it had been published, and it was available for public access. Publishing genetic information of HeLa cells affects the privacy of Henrietta's family. These concerns were raised, and as a compromise, 2 members of Henrietta's family now sit on a committee that regulates the access of this genetic information for research. Now, while this position on the committee does allow the family to have some say in how the genetic information is accessed and used, this agreement didn't come with financial compensation, even though an insanely amount of money has been made from the use of her cells. I hope from this video we can appreciate the significant contributions that Henrietta's cells have made to the field of medicine and biomedical research. But I also hope that we are aware of the mistreatment that Henrietta and her family have endured over a 70+ year period by the medical and scientific community. Henrietta shouldn't be hidden from history. Both her contribution to science and the scandal surrounding it should be widely known. And with that, I'll end this video here. If you have any kind of questions, feel free to ask them below, and I recommend that you read this book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. I hope this video was really eye-opening for all of us, and I hope that I'll see you soon in the next one. Bye.